Marcus wiped the sweat from his forehead as he loaded the last bag of feed into his old pickup truck. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. His small farm sat at the edge of civilization, where the modern world met the ancient wilderness. Most people thought he was crazy for choosing such an isolated place, but Marcus loved the peace and quiet. The nearest town was 40 miles away, and his closest neighbor lived 15 miles down the winding dirt road. Marcus had inherited this land from his grandfather, along with the old barn, a modest farmhouse and 200 acres of rolling hills and dense forest. He raised cattle and grew vegetables, making just enough money to get by. As he drove back from town with supplies, Marcus noticed dark clouds gathering overhead. The weather forecast had mentioned a storm, but it looked like it would hit sooner than expected. He pressed harder on the gas pedal, hoping to reach home before the rain started. The first drops hit his windshield just as he turned onto his property. By the time he parked near the barn, the rain was coming down in sheets. Thunder rolled across the sky, and lightning illuminated the darkness that had fallen quickly. Marcus grabbed as many supply bags as he could carry and ran toward the barn. The old wooden structure provided good shelter, and he had planned to unload everything there before taking what he needed to the house. As he fumbled for the light switch, another flash of lightning lit up the interior of the barn. That's when he saw her. A young woman was huddled in the corner, soaking wet and shivering. She couldn't have been more than 20 years old, with long black hair that clung to her face and traditional clothing that Marcus didn't recognize. Her dress was made of what looked like deer hide, decorated with intricate beadwork and patterns he had never seen before. Marcus dropped the bags he was carrying. The woman looked up at him with wide, frightened eyes. She said something in a language he didn't understand, her voice barely audible over the storm outside. She pressed herself further into the corner, clearly terrified. "Hey, it's okay," Marcus said softly, raising his hands to show he meant no harm. "I'm not going to hurt you. You're safe here." The woman continued to speak in her unknown language, pointing toward the forest and then back at herself. Her gestures seemed urgent, almost desperate. Marcus could see that she was injured. There was a cut on her arm that looked deep, and she favored her left leg when she tried to move. "You're hurt," Marcus said, taking a careful step closer. "Let me help you." The woman shook her head violently and tried to stand, but her injured leg gave out. She fell back against the wall, wincing in pain. Marcus could see that she was exhausted and probably hadn't eaten in days. Her cheeks were hollow and her clothes hung loosely on her thin frame. Marcus backed away and went to his truck, returning with a bottle of water and an energy bar from his emergency kit. He placed them on the ground between them and backed away again, gesturing for her to take them. The woman stared at the items for a long moment before reaching for the water bottle with shaking hands. She drank deeply, and Marcus could see some of the tension leave her shoulders. When she looked at him again, there was less fear in her eyes, though she still remained cautious. She unwrapped the energy bar and ate it quickly, as if she hadn't had food in days. "My name is Marcus," he said, pointing to himself. "Marcus." The woman pointed to herself and said something that sounded like Ayana. She repeated it several times until Marcus nodded in understanding. "Ayana," he repeated, and she smiled slightly for the first time. The storm continued to rage outside with no signs of stopping. Marcus realized that this young woman, whoever she was and wherever she had come from, needed medical attention. The cut on her arm looked infected, and she was clearly in no condition to travel anywhere in this weather. Marcus pulled out his cell phone, but as expected, there was no signal. The storm had probably knocked out the cell tower, and even on good days, reception was spotty this far from town. His landline phone was in the house, but he hesitated to leave Ayana alone. She was finally starting to trust him, and he didn't want to frighten her again. Using gestures and simple words, Marcus tried to communicate that he wanted to help her. He pointed to her injured arm and then to himself, making bandaging motions. Ayana seemed to understand and nodded slowly. Marcus had a first aid kit in his truck, so he retrieved it and began cleaning her wound as gently as possible. Ayana winced but didn't pull away. The cut was deeper than he had first thought, and it definitely needed proper medical attention, but his basic first aid would have to do for now. As he worked, Marcus noticed more details about Ayana's appearance. Her clothing was definitely handmade, with a craftsmanship that spoke of old traditions. The beadwork on her dress told a story through its patterns, though Marcus couldn't understand what it meant. Her jewelry was simple but beautiful, made of what looked like silver and turquoise. When he finished bandaging her arm, Ayanna spoke again in her language. This time, her tone was different. She sounded grateful but also worried. She kept looking toward the barn door as if expecting someone to appear at any moment. Marcus tried to ask her where she came from, using gestures to indicate direction and distance. Ayanna pointed toward the deep forest, the part of his property that bordered on government land. Miles and miles of wilderness stretched in that direction, much of it unexplored and unmapped. The storm finally began to subside, though rain still fell steadily. Marcus made a decision. Ayanna needed warmth, food, and rest. His farmhouse had a spare room, and he could keep a respectful distance while making sure she was safe and comfortable. "Come," he said, gesturing toward the door. House, warm, food. Ayanna looked uncertain, but when Marcus helped her to her feet, she didn't resist. She leaned heavily on him as they made their way through the rain to his house. Marcus could feel how light she was, and he worried that she might collapse before they reached the front door. Inside the farmhouse, Marcus led Ayanna to the spare bedroom and brought her clean, dry clothes that had belonged to his sister before she moved to the city. He showed Ayanna where the bathroom was and left her to clean up and change while he prepared some soup in the kitchen. As he cooked, Marcus couldn't stop thinking about this mysterious young woman. Where had she come from? Why was she alone in the forest? And why did she seem so frightened, as if she was running from something or someone? He had a feeling that helping Ayanna was going to change his quiet, simple life in ways he couldn't imagine. But as he listened to the rain against the windows and thought about the fear in her eyes, Marcus knew he had made the right choice. Whatever trouble she was in, whatever had brought her to his barn on this stormy night, he would help her figure it out. What Marcus didn't know was that by morning, his small farm would be surrounded by more danger than he had ever faced in his entire life. Marcus woke to the sound of birds singing outside his window. The storm had passed during the night, leaving behind a crisp, clean morning. Sunlight streamed through his bedroom curtains, and for a moment, he almost forgot about the events of the previous evening. Then he remembered Ayanna. He dressed quietly and walked to the spare room, knocking gently on the door. When there was no answer, he opened it carefully and found the room empty. The bed had been slept in, and the clothes he had given her were folded neatly on the chair, but Ayanna was gone. Marcus felt a pang of disappointment mixed with worry. Had she left during the night? Was she wandering the forest again, injured and alone? He checked the rest of the house and then stepped outside, calling her name softly. "Ayanna, are you here?" He found her sitting on his back porch, wearing her original clothes, which had somehow dried overnight. She was looking out at the forest with an expression of deep sadness. When she heard him approach, she turned and managed a small smile. "Good morning," Marcus said, though he wasn't sure she understood the words. He gestured toward the kitchen and rubbed his stomach. "Breakfast?" Ayanna nodded and followed him inside. As Marcus prepared eggs and toast, he noticed that she kept glancing out the windows as if watching for something. Her body language had changed since the night before. She seemed more alert, more tense. They ate in comfortable silence, communicating through smiles and gestures. Marcus was surprised by how natural it felt to have her there, despite the language barrier. There was something calming about her presence, something that made his usually quiet house feel more alive. After breakfast, Marcus went outside to tend to his cattle. The storm had knocked down part of his fence, and he needed to repair it before the animals wandered off. Ayanna followed him at a distance, watching with curiosity as he worked. As Marcus hammered a new fence post into the ground, he heard Ayanna make a sharp sound behind him. When he turned, she was staring at the forest with wide eyes, her face pale with fear. She grabbed his arm and spoke rapidly in her language, pointing toward the tree line. Marcus looked in the direction she was pointing, but saw nothing unusual, just trees still dripping from last night's rain and the normal sounds of the forest. But Ayanna's fear was real and intense. She pulled at his arm, trying to get him to move toward the house. "What is it?" Marcus asked, though he knew she couldn't understand him. "What do you see?" Ayanna continued to tug at his arm, her voice becoming more urgent. Then Marcus heard it too, a sound that didn't belong in his peaceful valley. It was rhythmic and getting closer, the sound of many feet moving through the forest in unison. Through the trees, Marcus caught glimpses of movement, figures dressed in earth-toned clothing, moving with purpose and stealth. As they came closer, he could see that they were men, each carrying weapons, bows, spears, and what looked like traditional knives. "Oh no," Marcus whispered, finally understanding Ayana's fear. The men emerged from the forest in a coordinated line, surrounding Marcus's property with military precision. There had to be at least 100 of them, all moving silently except for the soft sound of their feet on the wet ground. They wore clothing similar to Ayana's, made of leather and decorated with traditional patterns. Their faces were painted with symbols that Marcus didn't recognize, and their expressions were grim and determined. Ayana had hidden behind Marcus, trembling. She spoke to him in a whisper, and though he couldn't understand her words, her tone was apologetic. She was saying she was sorry, he was sure of it. The warriors formed a large circle around Marcus's farmhouse and barn, with him and Ayana in the center. They stood perfectly still, weapons ready but not yet threatening. It was clear they were waiting for something or someone. Marcus's mind raced. These men had obviously come for Ayana. She must have run away from them, from her tribe, and now they had tracked her to his farm. But why did she run? And what did they want with her? A figure emerged from the forest, different from the others. He was older, with gray hair braided with feathers and beads. His clothing was more elaborate, marking him as a leader or chief. He walked slowly toward Marcus and Ayana, his eyes fixed on the young woman. When the chief was about 20 feet away, he stopped and spoke in the same language Ayana had been using. His voice was deep and commanding, and Marcus could hear anger in his tone. Ayana stepped out from behind Marcus and replied, her voice shaking but defiant. The conversation between Ayana and the chief continued for several minutes. Marcus stood between them, feeling helpless and confused. He couldn't understand what they were saying, but he could see that it was some kind of argument. The chief's face grew darker with each exchange, while Ayana became more upset. Finally, the chief turned his attention to Marcus. He spoke in heavily accented English, his words slow and deliberate. "You help her escape," the chief said. "You interfere with our ways." "I don't know what you're talking about," Marcus replied, trying to keep his voice steady. "She was injured and lost. I was just helping her." The chief studied Marcus for a long moment. "She is promised a warrior of neighboring tribe. Marriage brings peace between our peoples. She runs away, brings shame to her family, breaks sacred agreement." Marcus glanced at Ayana, who was looking at the ground. Now he understood. She had run away from an arranged marriage, and her actions had consequences far beyond her own life. But that didn't change the fact that she had needed help, and he had been right to give it. "She was hurt and scared," Marcus said. "I couldn't just leave her in the storm." "Your kindness causes much trouble," the chief replied. "Now we must take her back, but first we decide what to do with you." The circle of warriors tightened slightly, and Marcus felt his heart rate increase. These men could easily overpower him, and he was miles away from any help. His nearest neighbor was too far away to hear if he called for help, and his phone still had no signal. Ayana spoke up again, her voice stronger this time. She gestured toward Marcus and then herself, speaking rapidly to the chief. Marcus couldn't understand her words, but he could tell she was defending him, trying to convince the chief that he was innocent. The chief listened to her argument, his expression unreadable. When she finished speaking, he was quiet for a long time, considering her words. The other warriors remained motionless, waiting for their leader's decision. "She says you are a good man," the chief finally said to Marcus. "She says you show kindness without asking for anything in return. She asks that we not harm you." "She's right," Marcus said. "I don't want anything from her. I just wanted to help." The chief nodded slowly. "But your help creates problem. Now we must solve this problem." Marcus looked around at the armed warriors surrounding his property. He was outnumbered and outgunned, but he wasn't about to back down. Ayana had needed help, and he had given it. He wouldn't apologize for doing the right thing. "What kind of problem?" Marcus asked. The chief's expression grew grave. "Neighboring tribe expects wedding in 3 days. When we return without bride, they will think we break agreement on purpose. This could mean war between our peoples." Marcus felt the weight of the situation settling on his shoulders. By helping one frightened young woman, he had accidentally become involved in a conflict that could affect hundreds of people. But looking at Ayana, seeing the sadness and fear in her eyes, he knew he couldn't regret his actions. "There has to be another solution," Marcus said. "Something that doesn't involve forcing her into a marriage she doesn't want." The chief studied him again, and Marcus thought he saw a hint of respect in the older man's eyes. Perhaps, the chief said slowly, but such solutions are not simple, and they require trust between peoples who do not know each other. As the morning sun climbed higher in the sky, Marcus realized that his quiet life as a farmer was about to become much more complicated. The 100 warriors standing around his property were just the beginning of a challenge that would test everything he believed about right and wrong. The chief, who had introduced himself as Chief Dakota, agreed to sit and discuss the situation rather than simply taking Ayanna by force. Marcus brought chairs from his porch and they sat in a small circle near the barn. Ayanna remained close to Marcus, still clearly afraid but no longer hiding behind him. Chief Dakota explained the situation in greater detail. Ayanna was the daughter of a respected elder in their tribe, and her marriage to a warrior from the neighboring Crow Feather tribe had been arranged to seal a peace treaty. The two tribes had been in conflict for generations, fighting over hunting grounds and water rights. The marriage was meant to end the bloodshed and create a lasting alliance. Many young people have died in these conflicts, Chief Dakota said, his voice heavy with sadness. Ayanna's marriage is not just about her future. It is about the future of all our children. Marcus looked at Ayanna, who was staring at her hands. He could see tears in her eyes as she listened to her chief speak. When Chief Dakota finished explaining, she spoke in their language, her voice passionate and pleading. "What is she saying?" Marcus asked. Chief Dakota was quiet for a moment before answering. She says she understands the importance of peace, but she asks why it must be bought with her freedom. She says she has never met this warrior she is supposed to marry, and she fears he will not treat her kindly. "Those are valid concerns," Marcus said. "Isn't there another way to make peace? Something that doesn't require sacrificing someone's happiness?" The chief shook his head. "You do not understand our ways. Marriage between tribes is how we have made peace for thousands of years. It creates bonds of family that are stronger than any written agreement." As they talked, Marcus noticed that some of the warriors had moved closer to listen. He could see curiosity in their faces, as if they too were interested in finding a different solution. These were not mindless soldiers following orders. They were men who cared about their people and wanted to do what was best for everyone. One of the younger warriors spoke to Chief Dakota in their language. The chief listened and then nodded thoughtfully. "Grey Wolf asks a good question," the chief said to Marcus. "He wants to know why you risk danger to help someone you do not know. In our culture, such actions are reserved for family or close friends." Marcus thought about the question carefully. "Where I come from, we believe that helping others is simply the right thing to do. It doesn't matter if they're family or strangers. If someone needs help and you can provide it, you should." Chief Dakota translated for the other warriors, and Marcus saw several of them nod in understanding. Ayanna looked up at him with gratitude in her eyes. "Your beliefs are honorable," the chief said, "but they have created a difficult situation. The Crow Feather tribe will arrive tomorrow to collect the bride. If we do not have Ayanna with us, they will consider it an act of war. Then we need to find a solution before tomorrow," Marcus said. "What if I went with you to speak to this other tribe? Maybe I could explain what happened and help negotiate a different agreement." Chief Dakota laughed, but not unkindly. "You are brave but foolish. The Crow Feather people do not trust outsiders, especially white men. Your presence would only make things worse." Ayanna spoke up again, and this time her voice was stronger, more determined. She stood and gestured as she talked, clearly arguing for something important. The chief listened carefully, occasionally asking questions or making comments. "What is she proposing?" Marcus asked when she finished. "She suggests something very dangerous," Chief Dakota said slowly. "She wants to return to the tribe and face the consequences of her actions. She will offer to accept a different punishment in place of the marriage, something that will still satisfy the Crow Feather tribe's honor." "What kind of punishment?" Marcus asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. "Among our people there are sacred trials," the chief explained. "Tests of courage and wisdom that can redeem someone who has brought shame to their family. If Ayanna successfully completes such a trial, it would prove her worth and might be acceptable to the other tribe in place of marriage." Marcus didn't like the sound of this. "What kind of trial? Is it dangerous?" Ayanna spoke directly to Marcus, and though he couldn't understand her words, he could hear the determination in her voice. She was willing to face whatever consequences awaited her, rather than continue running. "She says she has made her choice," Chief Dakota translated. "She will return with us and request the trial. but she wants you to know that your kindness gave her the strength to face her problems instead of just running from them. There has to be another way, Marcus insisted. What if the other tribe could be convinced to accept something else in place of the marriage? Gold, land, cattle? Chief Dakota shook his head. You still do not understand. This is not about wealth or property. It is about honor and family connections. The Crowfeather warrior who was to marry Ayanna has already prepared for the wedding. His family has invested much in this arrangement. To call it off now would be a great insult. As the afternoon wore on, Marcus realized that his desire to help Ayanna had put her in an even more difficult position. If she had stayed with her tribe and gone through with the marriage, at least she would have been safe. Now she faced an uncertain trial that could result in exile or worse. But when he looked at her face, he saw something that hadn't been there the night before: hope. Despite the danger she now faced, Ayanna seemed more at peace with herself. She had taken control of her own destiny, even if the outcome was uncertain. Chief Dakota stood and spoke to his warriors. Several of them began to move, forming new positions around the property. Marcus realized they were preparing to leave and take Ayanna with them. Wait, Marcus said. What can I do to help? There must be something. The chief studied him for a long moment. You have already done more than you know, he said. You showed kindness to a stranger, and you treated her with respect. These actions have value, even if they have also created problems. Ayanna approached Marcus and spoke to him in her language. Her voice was soft and grateful. When she finished, she reached into her bag and pulled out a small necklace made of silver and turquoise. She placed it around Marcus's neck, saying what sounded like a blessing or prayer. She gives you protection charm, Chief Dakota explained, made by her grandmother. She says it will keep you safe and bring you good fortune. Marcus touched the necklace, feeling the smooth stones and the weight of the silver. Tell her I'm honored to receive such a gift. As Chief Dakota translated, Ayanna smiled and nodded. Then she said something else, her tone more serious. She asks that you not forget her, the chief said, and she hopes that someday her people and yours can learn to understand each other better. I won't forget, Marcus promised. And I hope she finds the happiness and freedom she's looking for. The warriors began to move toward the forest, with Ayanna walking in the center of the group. Chief Dakota lingered for a moment, seeming to want to say something more. You're a good man, Marcus, he finally said. But goodness alone is not always enough to solve the world's problems. Sometimes the old ways exist for reasons that are not easy to see. Maybe, Marcus replied. But sometimes the old ways need to change, even if it's difficult. Chief Dakota nodded slowly. Perhaps. We will see what tomorrow brings. As the group disappeared into the forest, Marcus stood alone in his yard, touching the necklace Ayanna had given him. The sun was setting, and his property felt strangely empty after being surrounded by so many people. He had no idea what kind of trial Ayanna would face or whether he would ever see her again. But as he watched the last of the daylight fade behind the trees, Marcus knew that his encounter with Ayanna had changed him. He had been living a quiet, isolated life, avoiding complications and connections. Now he understood that sometimes the most important thing you could do was step outside your comfortable world and help someone else, even if it meant facing consequences you never expected. The question was whether Ayanna would survive the consequences of his help, and whether her courage would be enough to change the traditions that bound her people to the past. Marcus spent a restless night wondering about Ayanna's fate. He couldn't shake the image of her walking into the forest surrounded by warriors facing an uncertain future. By morning, he had made a decision that surprised even himself. He was going to find out what happened to her. After feeding his cattle and securing his property, Marcus loaded his backpack with supplies and set off into the forest. He had no idea exactly where Ayanna's tribe was located, but he was a skilled tracker from years of hunting on his land. The group of warriors had left clear signs of their passage, and Marcus followed their trail deeper into the wilderness. The forest was dense and ancient, filled with towering pines and thick undergrowth. Marcus moved carefully, aware that he was trespassing on tribal land and that his presence would not be welcome. But his concern for Ayanna outweighed his caution. After several hours of hiking, Marcus heard the sound of voices in the distance. He approached quietly and found himself looking down into a hidden valley where the tribe had made their camp. There were dozens of teepees arranged in a careful pattern, with cook fires sending thin streams of smoke into the clear morning air. Marcus found a concealed position behind some large rocks where he could observe without being seen. The camp was bustling with activity, and he could see people preparing for some kind of ceremony. In the center of the camp, a large circle had been marked on the ground with stones and symbols. As Marcus watched, he saw Ayana emerge from one of the larger teepees. She was wearing different clothes now, a white dress decorated with intricate beadwork that seemed to tell a story. Her hair was braided with feathers and small bones, and her face was painted with symbols that Marcus didn't recognize. Chief Dakota stood near the ceremonial circle, along with several other tribal elders. They were deep in discussion, occasionally gesturing toward different parts of the camp. Marcus could see tension in their body language, as if they were arguing about something important. Suddenly, the sound of horses approaching echoed through the valley. A group of riders appeared at the entrance to the camp, and Marcus realized these must be representatives from the Crow Feather tribe. The lead rider was a young man about Ayana's age, powerfully built and carrying himself with obvious pride. This had to be the warrior she was supposed to marry. The newcomers dismounted and were greeted formally by Chief Dakota and the elders. The young warrior, Marcus later learned his name was Strong Bear, looked around the camp expectantly, clearly searching for his intended bride. When he saw Ayana in her ceremonial dress instead of wedding attire, his expression darkened. A heated discussion began between the two groups. Marcus couldn't understand the words, but the tone was clear. Strong Bear and his companions were angry and confused. Chief Dakota was trying to explain the situation, while Ayana stood silently in the center of the ceremonial circle. Finally, Strong Bear spoke directly to Ayana. His voice carried across the camp, filled with anger and wounded pride. Ayana responded calmly, her chin raised in defiance. Even from his hiding place, Marcus could see the courage it took for her to face this powerful warrior who had expected to claim her as his wife. The argument continued for what felt like hours. Other members of both tribes gathered around the circle, adding their voices to the discussion. Marcus could see that some supported Ayana's right to choose her own path, while others believed she should honor the arrangement that had been made. As the sun reached its peak, an elderly woman emerged from the largest teepee. She walked with the aid of a carved staff and commanded immediate respect from everyone present. Even Strong Bear fell silent when she approached the circle. This was clearly the tribe's spiritual leader, their medicine woman. She spoke in a voice that was soft but carried authority. As she talked, she walked around the ceremonial circle, occasionally stopping to touch one of the stones or symbols. When the medicine woman finished speaking, Chief Dakota translated her words for Strong Bear and his companions. Marcus could see the Crow Feather warrior's expression change from anger to surprise, and then to something that looked like grudging respect. Ayana stepped forward and knelt in the center of the circle. The medicine woman placed her hands on Ayana's head and spoke what sounded like a blessing or prayer. Then she announced something that caused a stir throughout both groups. Chief Dakota raised his hand for silence and spoke in English, clearly for the benefit of Strong Bear, who had learned some of the white man's language. "The spirits have spoken," Chief Dakota announced. "Ayana has requested the trial of 3 paths, an ancient test that has not been used in 2 generations. If she succeeds, her debt to both tribes will be paid, and she will be free to choose her own destiny. If she fails, she will accept whatever punishment the spirits decree." Strong Bear stepped forward, his face twisted with anger. "This is not what was agreed upon," he said in broken English. "My family has prepared for wedding. My tribe expects alliance through marriage." The medicine woman spoke again, this time directly to Strong Bear. Her words seemed to calm him, and after a long moment, he nodded slowly. "What did she say?" Marcus whispered to himself, wishing he could understand. As if in answer to his question, Chief Dakota translated for everyone present. "She reminds Strong Bear that true honor comes not from taking what is given reluctantly, but from earning what is offered freely. If Ayana completes the trial successfully, it will prove her worth and bring honor to both tribes. If she fails, the wedding can proceed as planned." Strong Bear considered this, then spoke to his companions in their own language. After a brief discussion, he turned back to Chief Dakota. "We will witness this trial," Strong Bear announced. "If the woman succeeds, the Crow Feather people will accept this as payment for the broken agreement. But if she fails, the wedding will take place immediately, and there will be additional compensation required for the insult to our honor. Ayanna stood in the center of the circle as the terms were agreed upon. Marcus could see that she was nervous but determined. She had asked for this trial, knowing that failure would make her situation even worse than before. The medicine woman began to explain the 3 challenges that Ayanna would face. The first was the test of courage, where she would have to venture alone into the deep forest and retrieve a sacred feather from the nest of a golden eagle, high in the cliff faces that bordered the valley. The second was the test of wisdom, where she would have to solve an ancient riddle that had been passed down through generations of tribal elders. The riddle involved understanding the balance between individual desires and community needs. The third and most dangerous was the test of spirit, where Ayanna would have to spend 3 days and nights alone in the sacred cave, fasting and meditating until the spirits either accepted her petition or rejected it. Marcus felt his heart sink as he heard these challenges. Each one was dangerous, and the combination seemed almost impossible. The eagle's nest was in an area known for rock slides and dangerous climbing. The riddle had stumped tribal members for generations, and the sacred cave was said to drive some people mad with visions and spiritual experiences too intense for ordinary minds to handle. But Ayanna listened to each challenge with growing determination. When the medicine woman finished explaining the trials, Ayanna spoke in a clear, strong voice that carried across the entire camp. Chief Dakota translated her words. She says she accepts all 3 challenges and asks to begin immediately. She says that her spirit is ready, and she trusts in the wisdom of her ancestors to guide her path. Strong Bear looked skeptical, but there was also something like admiration in his eyes. She is brave, he admitted grudgingly, but bravery alone will not be enough. As the camp began to prepare for the trial, Marcus realized he was about to witness something extraordinary. Ayanna was risking everything for the chance to control her own destiny. The courage she was showing inspired him, but it also terrified him. What if she didn't survive the challenges? What if her quest for freedom ended in tragedy? From his hiding place in the rocks, Marcus settled in to watch and wait. He couldn't help Ayanna directly without making her situation worse, but he wasn't going to abandon her either. Whatever happened in the coming days, at least she would know that someone who cared about her was watching and hoping for her success. As the sun began to set over the valley, Ayanna prepared for the first challenge. The test of courage would begin at dawn, and by tomorrow night everyone would know whether her quest for freedom had any chance of success. Dawn broke cold and clear over the hidden valley. Marcus had spent an uncomfortable night among the rocks, but he was awake and alert as the camp began to stir below. Today would determine whether Ayanna's courage was matched by her skill and determination. The test of courage required her to climb the treacherous cliff face that rose from the eastern edge of the valley and retrieve a sacred feather from a golden eagle's nest. The climb itself was dangerous enough, but golden eagles were known to be fiercely protective of their territory, especially during nesting season. Ayanna emerged from her teepee wearing simple climbing clothes made of soft leather. Her hair was braided tightly to keep it out of her way, and she carried only a small pouch containing sacred herbs and a blessing from the medicine woman. No ropes, no climbing equipment, just her own strength and skill. The entire camp gathered at the base of the cliff to witness the first trial. Strong Bear stood with his warriors, his arms crossed and his expression doubtful. Chief Dakota and the tribal elders formed a circle and began chanting prayers for Ayanna's safety and success. Marcus studied the cliff face from his hiding place and felt his stomach tighten with worry. The rock was weathered limestone, cracked and crumbling in many places. Handholds that looked solid from a distance might give way under a climber's weight. And somewhere near the top, at least 200 feet above the valley floor, was the eagle's nest. The medicine woman approached Ayanna and placed a hand on her shoulder. She spoke words of blessing and guidance, then stepped back to give the young woman space to begin her climb. Ayanna looked up at the towering cliff, took a deep breath and placed her hands on the rock. The first 50 feet of the climb went smoothly. Ayanna moved with the grace and confidence of someone who had been climbing since childhood. She tested each handhold carefully before trusting it with her full weight, and she found roots up the rock face that even Marcus, an experienced outdoorsman, wouldn't have seen. But as she climbed higher, the rock became more treacherous. Marcus watched in terror as a ledge crumbled under her foot, sending a shower of stones tumbling into the valley below. Ayanna managed to catch herself with her hands, but she hung there for several long seconds, searching for a new foothold. From his position, Marcus could see something that the people in the valley couldn't. There was a storm building to the west. Dark clouds were gathering on the horizon, and he could feel the wind beginning to pick up. If the weather turned bad while Ayanna was on the cliff face, she would be in even greater danger. As Ayanna continued her climb, Marcus noticed movement near the top of the cliff. The golden eagles had spotted the intruder approaching their nest. Two magnificent birds circled overhead, their cries echoing off the rock walls. Their wingspan was enormous, and Marcus knew that even one of them could knock a climber from the cliff if they chose to attack. Ayanna was now more than halfway up the cliff, moving more slowly as the handholds became scarcer and the rock more unstable. She paused frequently to rest and plan her next moves. From the valley below, Marcus could hear the tribal members chanting and singing, offering their spiritual support for her dangerous journey. Strong Bear had moved closer to the cliff, and Marcus could see concern on his face despite his earlier skepticism. Whatever he thought about Ayanna's refusal to marry him, he clearly didn't want to see her die in the attempt to prove her worth. As Ayanna approached the eagle's nest, the adult birds became more agitated. They dove at her repeatedly, their talons extended and their cries deafening. Ayanna pressed herself against the rock face, trying to avoid their attacks while still making progress upward. Marcus gripped the stones in front of him, wanting desperately to help, but knowing that any interference would invalidate the trial and make Ayanna's sacrifice meaningless. All he could do was watch and hope that her courage and skill would be enough. The first drops of rain began to fall just as Ayanna reached the ledge where the eagle's nest was located. The massive structure was built into a crack in the rock face, constructed of sticks and branches and lined with feathers and soft grasses. Marcus could see the heads of baby eagles peeking over the edge of the nest, and he knew that the adult birds would fight even more fiercely to protect their young. Ayanna clung to the ledge with one hand while reaching toward the nest with the other. The parent eagles attacked with renewed fury, one of them striking her shoulder with its talons and drawing blood. But Ayanna didn't give up. She spoke to the eagles in her native language, her voice calm and respectful despite the pain and danger. Something in her tone seemed to affect the birds. They continued to circle and cry out warnings, but they stopped their direct attacks. Ayanna reached into the nest carefully, avoiding the baby eagles, and selected a single golden feather that had been shed by one of the adults. As she secured the feather in her pouch, the rain began to fall more heavily. The rock face became slippery, making the descent even more treacherous than the climb up had been. Ayanna moved carefully, testing each hold twice before trusting it with her weight. Halfway down, disaster struck. A large section of rock gave way under her feet, and Ayanna found herself hanging by her fingertips from a narrow ledge. Her legs swung free, and Marcus could see her struggling to find something to brace herself against. The crowd in the valley gasped in horror. Several of the warriors started toward the cliff as if to attempt a rescue, but Chief Dakota held them back. This was Ayanna's trial, and she had to complete it on her own or it would have no meaning. For what seemed like an eternity, Ayanna hung from the ledge, her strength fading with each passing second. Marcus could see her muscles trembling with exhaustion, and he knew she couldn't hold on much longer. The rain was making everything more difficult, and the wind was beginning to howl through the valley. Then, with a supreme effort, Ayanna managed to swing her legs to the side and catch her foot on a small projection in the rock. Using this leverage, she pulled herself up and found a more secure handhold. The crowd below released a collective sigh of relief. The rest of the descent was agonizingly slow but successful. When Ayanna finally reached the ground, her hands were bloody and her clothes were torn. But she was alive, and she had the eagle's feather to prove her courage. The medicine woman approached and examined the feather carefully. She held it up to the light and spoke a few words over it, then nodded with satisfaction. Ayanna had passed the first test. But even as the tribal members celebrated this victory, Marcus could see the exhaustion in Ayanna's face. She had one brief night to rest before facing the test of wisdom, and then the most dangerous trial of all would still await her. Strong Bear approached Ayanna as the crowd began to disperse. Marcus couldn't hear what he said to her, but his tone seemed different now, respectful rather than angry. Ayanna listened to his words and nodded, then replied briefly before walking toward her teepee to rest and prepare for the next challenge. As night fell over the valley, Marcus remained at his watching post among the rocks. The storm had passed, leaving behind clear skies and bright stars, but he knew that the greater storm still lay ahead. 2 more trials stood between Ayanna and her freedom, and each one would test her in different ways. The test of wisdom would challenge her mind and understanding, while the test of spirit would probe the very depths of her soul. Marcus could only hope that the courage she had shown on the cliff face would be enough to carry her through the ordeals that awaited her. As he settled in for another uncomfortable night in the wilderness, Marcus touched the necklace Ayanna had given him and whispered a prayer for her continued safety and success. Tomorrow would bring new dangers, but tonight at least she had proven that her spirit was as strong as her desire for freedom. The second day dawned bright and warm, a sharp contrast to the stormy weather that had made Ayanna's cliff climb even more dangerous. Marcus watched from his hiding place as the camp prepared for the test of wisdom. This challenge would be different from the physical trial of the previous day, but in many ways, it might prove even more difficult. The test of wisdom centered around an ancient riddle that had been passed down through generations of tribal elders. Many wise men and women had attempted to solve it over the years, but none had found an answer that satisfied the spirits and the council of elders. The riddle dealt with the eternal struggle between individual desires and the needs of the community. A large gathering area had been prepared in the center of the camp, with the tribal elders seated in a semicircle facing a single chair where Ayanna would sit. Strong Bear and his warriors were also present, as were representatives from several other tribes who had arrived during the night to witness these historic trials. Ayanna appeared calm as she took her place in the chair, but Marcus could see the tension in her shoulders. She had spent the night in meditation and prayer, preparing her mind for this intellectual and spiritual challenge. The medicine woman had provided her with herbs to sharpen her thinking and help her see clearly, but ultimately, this test would depend entirely on Ayanna's own wisdom and understanding. Chief Dakota stood and addressed the assembly in both his native language and in English, so that Strong Bear and the other visitors could understand the proceedings. "The test of wisdom has been part of our people's traditions for countless generations," he began. "It is not merely a test of knowledge, but of understanding the deeper truths that guide our lives. The riddle that Ayanna must solve has no single correct answer, but her response must demonstrate wisdom that satisfies both the individual spirit and the community good." The medicine woman rose from her place among the elders and approached Ayanna. In her hands she carried an ancient scroll made of deer hide, covered with symbols and markings that looked incredibly old. She unrolled the scroll carefully and began to read the riddle in the traditional language. Chief Dakota then translated the riddle into English. "A young eagle soars high above the mountains, free and alone, hunting where it pleases and answering to no one. Below, a flock of sparrows moves together, sharing food and protection but never rising to the great heights the eagle knows. The eagle looks down and sees the sparrow's limitations. The sparrows look up and see the eagle's loneliness. Both are correct in what they see, yet both are incomplete in their understanding. How can the eagle and the sparrows learn from each other without losing what makes them who they are?" Marcus frowned as he considered the riddle. It seemed to be a metaphor for Ayanna's own situation, the conflict between personal freedom and community responsibility. But finding an answer that would satisfy the tribal elders would require deep insight into human nature and social dynamics. Ayanna sat quietly for a long time, her eyes closed in concentration. The assembled crowd waited patiently, understanding that wisdom could not be rushed. Even Strong Bear seemed interested in how she would approach this challenge. Finally, Ayanna opened her eyes and looked around the circle of elders. When she spoke, her voice was clear and confident, though Marcus could hear the underlying nervousness. "The riddle speaks of 2 different ways of living," she began, "but it assumes they must remain separate and in conflict. The eagle believes that freedom means solitude, while the sparrows believe that safety means conformity. Both are afraid of losing their identity if they change." She paused, gathering her thoughts before continuing. "But what if the truth is that both the eagle and the sparrows are incomplete, because they see only one path? The eagle could teach the sparrows about courage and reaching for greater heights, while the sparrows could teach the eagle about the strength that comes from connection and community support." One of the elders, an ancient man with wise eyes, leaned forward with interest. He spoke in the tribal language, asking what sounded like a question. Chief Dakota translated. Elder Whitehawk asks how this learning could happen without destroying what makes each group unique. Ayana considered this carefully. The eagle doesn't have to give up its ability to soar high and hunt alone, but it could also learn to return to the flock sometimes, to share its knowledge of the high places, and to receive the comfort of community. The sparrows don't have to abandon their collective wisdom and mutual support, but some of them could learn to fly higher and explore new territories, bringing back knowledge that benefits the entire flock. Another elder spoke up, and Chief Dakota translated. Elder Running Bear asks what happens when the needs of the individual and the community are in direct conflict. What if helping one means harming the other? This was the heart of the riddle, and Marcus could see that Ayana understood the weight of the question. Her own situation was a perfect example of this. Conflict, her personal desire for freedom, seemed to conflict with her tribe's need for peace through alliance. When there is conflict between individual needs and community needs, Ayana said slowly, the answer is not to automatically choose one over the other. The answer is to look deeper and find creative solutions that honor both. Sometimes what appears to be a conflict is really just a failure of imagination. She stood up and gestured toward Strong Bear and his warriors. My people believe that peace with the Crow Feather tribe requires my marriage to Strong Bear. Strong Bear's people believe they have been dishonored by my refusal. Both sides see only one solution: force me to accept the marriage or face the consequences. Strong Bear's eyes narrowed, but he listened intently as Ayana continued. But what if there are other ways to create bonds between our peoples? What if I could serve both tribes as a messenger or translator, using my knowledge of both cultures to prevent future conflicts? What if Strong Bear could find a bride who truly wants to marry him, creating a union based on mutual respect rather than political necessity? The crowd murmured with interest at this suggestion. Even some of Strong Bear's warriors seemed intrigued by the possibility of alternative solutions. The eagle and the sparrows both have gifts that the other needs, Ayana concluded. But they can only share these gifts if they are willing to see beyond their traditional ways of thinking. True wisdom lies not in choosing between individual freedom and community good, but in finding ways to strengthen both. The elders conferred among themselves in their native language, their discussion growing quite animated at times. Marcus could see that Ayana's answer had sparked genuine debate about the nature of tradition, change, and compromise. Finally, the medicine woman stood and spoke to the assembly. Her words carried the weight of spiritual authority, and even Strong Bear listened respectfully. Chief Dakota translated her verdict. The medicine woman says that Ayana has shown true wisdom. She has not simply given a clever answer to an old riddle, but has demonstrated understanding of the deeper principles that guide our people. She sees that tradition and change are not enemies but partners in the dance of life. Strong Bear stood and approached Ayana. For a moment, Marcus thought he might challenge her answer or demand that the trial continue. Instead, the Crow Feather warrior spoke directly to her in English. Your words have wisdom, he admitted grudgingly. I came here expecting to claim a reluctant bride and return with honor satisfied through force. But you speak of honor satisfied through understanding. This is a new idea for me. He turned to address both groups of tribal members. I propose that we consider the solutions Ayana has suggested. Perhaps there are ways to build bridges between our peoples that are stronger than marriages based on duty alone. The elders nodded approvingly. Ayana had not only solved the ancient riddle, but had also opened new possibilities for resolving the immediate crisis between the tribes. But even as the crowd celebrated this breakthrough, Marcus knew that the most dangerous trial still lay ahead. The test of spirit would require Ayana to face her deepest fears and prove that her spiritual strength matched her physical courage and intellectual wisdom. As preparations began for the final trial, Marcus settled back into his hiding place and prepared for what might be the most difficult 3 days of watching and waiting in his life. Ayana had shown remarkable courage and wisdom, but the test of spirit would challenge her in ways that no amount of preparation could fully address. The sacred cave awaited, and with it, the ultimate test of whether Ayana's quest for freedom would succeed or end in spiritual devastation. The sacred cave lay hidden in a canyon 2 miles from the main camp, accessible only by a narrow path that wound through towering stone formations. Marcus had moved his observation post during the night, following the procession of tribal members as they escorted Ayanna to the location of her final trial. The test of spirit was unlike the previous challenges. There would be no audience, no immediate danger that could be seen and measured. Ayanna would enter the cave alone with only a small water gourd and her courage. For 3 days and nights she would fast and meditate, opening herself to whatever visions or spiritual experiences the sacred place might bring. Many who had attempted this trial in the past had emerged changed forever. Some enlightened, others broken by what they had witnessed in the depths of their own souls. A few had never emerged at all, choosing to remain in the cave rather than return to the world outside. Marcus watched from a concealed position as the medicine woman prepared Ayanna for the ordeal ahead. Sacred herbs were burned, and blessings were spoken over the young woman who had already proven her courage and wisdom. Chief Dakota and the tribal elders formed a circle around the cave entrance, chanting prayers that would continue for the entire 3 days. Strong Bear had remained with the group, his earlier antagonism replaced by something approaching respect. He spoke briefly with Ayanna before she entered the cave, and Marcus could see that their conversation was serious but not hostile. Whatever the Crowfeather warrior had said, Ayanna nodded and replied with what appeared to be gratitude. As the sun reached its zenith, the medicine woman led Ayanna to the cave entrance. The opening was small and dark, carved into the canyon wall by centuries of wind and water. Ancient symbols were painted around the entrance in colors that had faded but not disappeared over countless years. Ayanna paused at the threshold and looked back at the assembled tribal members. Her gaze seemed to search the surrounding cliffs, and Marcus wondered if she somehow knew he was watching. Then she turned and disappeared into the darkness of the cave. The waiting began. Marcus had brought enough supplies to last several days, but he knew this would be the most difficult part of his vigil. Unlike the previous trials, there was nothing to see, no action to follow. All he could do was watch the cave entrance and wait for some sign that Ayanna was safe. The first day passed slowly. The tribal members maintained their prayer circle, taking turns so that the chanting never stopped. Strong Bear and his warriors made camp nearby, apparently committed to seeing the trial through to its conclusion. As night fell, Marcus could see the glow of their fires reflected on the canyon walls. On the second day, Marcus began to worry. He had heard stories about the sacred cave from his grandfather, who had known some of the old tribal members before the reservations were established. The cave was said to amplify spiritual experiences, sometimes to dangerous levels. People had been known to lose themselves in visions, unable to distinguish between reality and the world of spirits. That afternoon, Marcus heard something that made his blood run cold, screaming from inside the cave. It was Ayanna's voice, filled with terror and anguish. The sound echoed off the canyon wall, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The tribal members continued their prayers, showing no sign of alarm. This was apparently a normal part of the spiritual trial, but Marcus had to grip the rocks in front of him to keep from running to the cave entrance. Every instinct told him that Ayanna was in danger and needed help, but he knew that interfering would destroy everything she had worked to achieve. The screaming continued intermittently throughout the day and into the night. Sometimes it sounded like fear, other times like rage or grief. Marcus began to understand that Ayanna was confronting not just external spiritual forces, but the deepest parts of her own psyche. By the third day, the screaming had stopped, replaced by an eerie silence that was somehow even more unsettling. Marcus watched the cave entrance obsessively, looking for any sign of movement. The tribal members had grown quieter too, their prayers more intense and focused. As the sun began to set on the third day, marking the end of the trial period, everyone gathered closer to the cave entrance. This was the moment of truth. Ayanna would either emerge transformed by her spiritual journey, or she would not emerge at all. The medicine woman approached the cave entrance and called out in the tribal language. Her voice echoed into the darkness, but there was no response. She called again, louder this time, and the assembled crowd held their breath. Minutes passed. Then, just as Marcus was beginning to fear the worst, a figure appeared at the cave entrance. It was Ayanna, but she looked dramatically different from the young woman who had entered 3 days earlier. Her hair was wild and tangled, her face gaunt from fasting, and her eyes held a depth and intensity that hadn't been there before. She moved slowly, as if still partially in the world of visions she had experienced, but she was alive and she was walking on her own. The medicine woman supported Ayana as she emerged fully from the cave. The young woman looked around at the assembled crowd as if seeing them for the first time, then spoke in a voice that was barely above a whisper. Chief Dakota translated her words for Strong Bear and the others. She says the spirits have shown her many things. They have revealed truths about herself, about her people, and about the path forward. She is ready to share what she has learned. As Ayana was helped to a place where she could sit and rest, Marcus could see the profound change in her. The frightened young woman who had hidden in his barn was gone, replaced by someone who radiated a quiet strength and wisdom that came from having faced her deepest fears and survived. Strong Bear approached cautiously, clearly affected by the transformation he witnessed. When he spoke to Ayana, his tone was respectful, almost reverent. "What did the spirits tell you about our people's future?" he asked. Ayana looked at him with eyes that seemed to see beyond the present moment. "They showed me a vision of our children playing together, learning from both tribes, carrying forward the best of our traditions while creating new ones. They showed me that the old ways of making peace through forced marriages belong to the past, but that new ways of building bridges between peoples are possible." She turned to Chief Dakota and continued, "The spirits also showed me that my desire for freedom was not selfish, but part of a larger pattern. The time has come for our people to find new ways of honoring both individual gifts and community needs." The medicine woman examined Ayana carefully, looking for signs that the spiritual ordeal had damaged her mind or spirit. After a thorough assessment, she nodded with satisfaction and spoke to the assembled crowd. Chief Dakota translated, "The medicine woman declares that Ayana has successfully completed all 3 trials. Her courage, wisdom, and spiritual strength have been proven. According to our ancient laws, she has earned the right to choose her own path." Strong Bear stood silent for a long moment, clearly struggling with emotions he hadn't expected to feel. Finally, he spoke. "I came here to claim a bride who was promised to me. Instead, I have witnessed the birth of a leader who may be more valuable to both our peoples than any marriage alliance could be." He turned to his warriors and spoke in their language. After a brief discussion, he faced the assembled crowd again. "The Crowfeather people accept the completion of these trials as payment for the broken marriage agreement," he announced. "But we propose something more. We invite Ayana to serve as an ambassador between our tribes, helping us find new ways to build peace and understanding." Chief Dakota looked surprised, but pleased by this unexpected development. He conferred quickly with the tribal elders, then responded, "Our people accept this proposal. Ayana has proven herself worthy of such responsibility." As the crowd began to celebrate this resolution, Marcus finally allowed himself to relax. Ayana had not only won her freedom, but had transformed a potential conflict into an opportunity for greater cooperation between the tribes. As the celebration continued into the night, Ayana seemed to sense that she was being watched. She looked up toward the cliffs where Marcus was hidden and smiled slightly, raising her hand in what might have been a greeting or a farewell. Marcus touched the necklace she had given him and whispered a prayer of gratitude. The frightened young woman he had helped in his barn had become a bridge between worlds, proving that sometimes the most important thing you can do is help someone find the courage to become who they were meant to be. As he prepared to make his way back to his farm, Marcus knew that this experience had changed him too. He had learned that isolation and safety were not the same thing, and that sometimes the greatest adventures came from simply choosing to help a stranger in need. The story of the tribal maiden and her trials would become a legend told around fires for generations to come. But for Marcus, it would always be the story of how helping one person can change not just their life, but the lives of entire communities. Years later, when traders and travelers spoke of the wise woman who served as ambassador between the tribes, bringing peace and understanding to people who had been enemies for generations, Marcus would smile and remember the stormy night when courage first walked into his barn, asking for nothing more than shelter from the rain.